Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Doug. Maybe I'm not the only person who's not a morning person here. All right, good morning. There you go. See, that was better. It says here I'm supposed to make announcements. I think there's only one thing I'm supposed to announce, and that's some of the folks here from Arizona have been asking me about this phenomenon in the sky that's happening. It's rain. It happens. And we learned yesterday you don't say no to rain. Even if it's been happening for 2 weeks, you don't say no to rain. Welcome back. We have another interesting day lined up. So let's just launch into it. We're starting with our updates from the tribes, and there's plenty of things to talk about, so I will be brief before I hand it over to Tahlia, who's going to moderate this session. Tahlia, everyone knows Tahlia, right? Tahlia is an enrolled member of the Fort McDowell Yavapai Nation and Navajo, and is a key member of the Water and Tribes Initiative team, and of course they're the co-conveners of this event. Welcome. She is the Senior Indigenous Peoples Engagement Manager for Western Resource Advocates. At least that's what her bio says. There's all sorts of, you're kind of like me, there's all sorts of titles and affiliations I could mention, but I think that's enough. She's got a fabulous panel, so I don't really want to do anything more than I've done. So Tahlia, do you want to just take over?
Sure.
All right.
Thank you, Doug.
Sure.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. As Doug said, my name is Tahlia Bear. I'm the Senior Indigenous Peoples Engagement Manager at Western Resource Advocates. And as Doug said, I'm an enrolled member of the Fort McDowell Yavapai Nation in Arizona, and I'm also Navajo. And I'm really honored this morning to moderate the discussion this morning. I wanted to start off by just saying how appreciative I am of the theme of this conference, turning hindsight into foresight. As someone who is new to Colorado River issues and who was not working in this sector when the first iteration of the interim guidelines was developed, I appreciate all the perspectives from yesterday and the opportunity to reflect on lessons learned. Keeping in line with the theme, the goal of this morning's session is to hear from tribal representatives on this panel who are going to provide an update on some of the progress and important considerations being brought forward by tribes in the post-2026 process. So the structure of the time we have together is going to begin with opening statements from each panelist, followed up by some directed questions, and then we can shift into the 30-minute audience Q&A. And like yesterday, we are going to use Slido, but please feel free to type in your questions at any point during the panel session. So let's first begin by introducing our panelists who represent a diversity of tribes located in both the upper and lower basins. I will introduce all the panelists at once, and then we can begin with opening statements. So today we have with us Peter Ortego. Peter has served 24 years for the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe Justice Department, focusing on water rights, and who now works at Acadian Desert Consulting and is the Special Water Counsel for the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe. We also have with us this morning Bidtah Becker. Bidtah has dedicated her career to serving the Navajo Nation and its natural resources, including in many roles, including an appointment as the California EPA Deputy Secretary for Environmental Justice, Tribal Affairs, and Border Relations. Currently, Bidtah is the Chief Legal Counsel with the Navajo Nation Office of the President and Vice President. We also have with us Jason Hauter. Jason has represented his community, the Gila River Indian community, since 2016 in its efforts to protect its water rights settlement. He's currently partner and attorney at Acadian, a global law firm, and is representing the Gila River Indian community. And then finally, we also have Jay Weiner. Jay has worked with tribal and tribal governments since 1994 and maintains expertise in federal Indian law and has worked on multiple Indian water rights settlements. Currently, he is counsel at Rosette LLP, water lawyer for the Quechan tribe. So we have an impressive set of panelists, and why don't we get started? I would first like to begin, if you could all reflect on some of the lessons you've learned with respect to both policy and process in past basin-wide planning efforts, and how these lessons can and should be reflected in the post-2026 guidelines. And then if you could also describe any meaningful action that tribes have been taking to drive the process to develop the post-2026. And we'll start with Peter.
Thank you. Good morning. It's good to see you all, so many familiar faces. I've been to this conference a few times, and it's always a real pleasure. It's been an honor for me to serve as the General Counsel for the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe and to now serve as their Special Water Counsel. And so I'm speaking on their behalf. At the same time, though, I want to respect their traditions and their culture. I'm not a Ute Mountain Ute tribal member, but I'm honored to be able to present these topics on their behalf. The Ute Mountain Ute Tribe, as you may know, is in southwest Colorado, northwestern New Mexico, and southeastern Utah. It's in 3 states. The tribe has settled its water rights in one of those states, in Colorado. It is pursuing a settlement of its water rights right now in New Mexico and Utah. And in Colorado, one of the lessons that we learned is the tribe shares in shortages. So when it agreed to have its water rights, there are a few concessions it made. In order to secure the water rights that the tribe had in the Colorado Ute settlement, it worked with numerous stakeholders. I mean, that's the best way to do these things, is to try to work with the people that you're involved with the water, and to try to find a solution that both helps the tribe and helps everybody else. An example of that is in the New Mexico settlement. The tribe is looking at forming a community in New Mexico. Right now, the tribe doesn't have anybody living on the reservation in New Mexico. It's mainly oil and gas, a little bit of ranching going on, but there's nobody who actually lives there on a full-time basis. In order to form that community, we're going to need help. We're going to need help from the local non-Indian communities. And so we're finding ways to work with those communities to bring benefit to them as well. And so it's a mutually beneficial arrangement for the tribe to secure its water rights and to negotiate its water rights. But it makes concessions too. And when it secured its water rights in Colorado, one of the concessions it made was that it would share in shortages. And in that settlement, there are 2 main reservoirs, one called the McPhee Reservoir, which is the one we'll be talking about right now. Then the ALP water right is in what's called Lake Nighthorse by Durango, and I'll talk about that in a moment. The lesson that we learned over at McPhee was a few years ago, there was a major drought, and because we share in shortages, we were just like every other water user out at McPhee. There's one exception to that I don't need to get into, but for the most part, we were like every other water user in McPhee. And we only got 10% of our water allocation that year. Now, that affected everybody. That affected every farmer, that affected the tribe, but the effects are a little different. I don't want to disrespect any farmer out there or undermine what they go through when they have a shortage. I'm sure it's extremely severe on them. But the effect on the tribe is different, and I think that needs to be understood. In order for tribes to give money to their tribal members on a tax-free basis, they can issue it on a per capita basis, so they issue it to a class of individuals. And in order for it to be tax-free, that money has to come from a resource, from a tribal resource. So when the tribe earns funds from its oil and gas revenues or from its farming revenues, it can distribute those profits on a per capita basis to its tribal members. And that's what the tribe does. Its tribal members are not wealthy. It's a small community. There's about 2,100 people, 2,100 tribal members. About 1,300 people live in Toyoak, which is in Colorado. And the poverty rate is high. It's an isolated community. They have a little bit of trouble with their border towns. So it's a struggle, and the tribal members need that additional money. But when that farm couldn't earn that revenue that year, that was a serious impact upon the tribe's ability to provide assistance to its tribal members. And so the impact isn't a family, or it's not a farmer's profits. Like I said, I don't want to undermine the impact of that. I think that's important. But the impact is to an entire community. And so it's a little different when we have shortages, when we share in shortages for the Ute Mountain Ute tribe. That's one problem we identified. And then another problem we identified is over at the Animas La Plata project, or the Lake Nighthorse, where we have the Animas La Plata water right. The tribe is not able to, we learned that the tribe is not able to participate in some of the conservation programs that were currently going on. You guys have probably heard of the System Conservation Pilot Program, which was implemented in Colorado last year. And part of that program required that participants curtail use of water that they're currently using. So they have to be consuming water now, then they have to stop that consumption, and then they get compensated for letting that water bypass their outtakes. Ute Mountain has water in Lake Nighthorse that is stored there, but it also has water that bypasses the reservoir. The tribe is allowed to take that water that bypasses. It has a depletion right of about 16,000 acre feet. It could pull that water directly out of the river. It doesn't have to use the reservoir. But right now, the tribe is not able to do that. It has no infrastructure. When it did its water rights settlement, infrastructure for that water delivery was removed from the project. At one time, it was part of the project, but then that was removed. Irrigation water was removed, so all that water for the tribe is just municipal and industrial. It can't use that for farming. And so it's really difficult for the tribe to access that water. In the meantime, that water is bypassing the tribe and it's going into New Mexico, where it goes down, it goes into the San Juan River. It actually goes through the San Juan River and then it comes back up into Colorado again at Four Corners. So the tribe could potentially use it at Four Corners. It can use it anywhere in Colorado, but it cannot use that water in New Mexico. However, we're pretty sure there are people using that water in New Mexico. During wet years, the tribe's water probably makes it all the way to Lake Powell. But in dry years, it does not. We're pretty sure it gets used before it gets to Powell. So there are people along the line using the tribe's water who themselves can participate in a conservation program. One of those users could say, oh, I will no longer use the water that's in the river, and I will get compensated for not using that water. Because they are using it now, and now they're going to agree to not use it, so they get compensated for it. The tribe can't do that. So the tribe's water, I'm not saying that there's someone out there literally saying, oh, here's the tribe's water, I'm going to use it. We know that's not how that works, but the tribe cannot participate in that program. This was a problem we identified early on. And so we've been working with the Upper Colorado River Commission and the 4 states in the upper division to try to solve some of these problems. And one of the things that we came up with was 5 potential uses of water that the tribes can contribute to the system. As you may know, the upper division states have proposed 2 pools in Lake Powell. One pool is a protection pool that would come from the upper units, and the other pool is what we're calling a savings pool, which would be contributed by both Indian and non-Indian water users. And it would be on a voluntary, temporary, and compensated basis. So all those people who contribute water to that could be compensated. And so the tribes came up with 5 categories. And the first category is just what I just described. It's very similar to the SCPP program. The tribe does have water that it could contribute through its farm and ranch. It is currently consuming its water out of McPhee. That could potentially go into an SCPP type program. The other type of water that we've identified is water that's been stored but is not currently being used. That would be the water that's stored in Lake Nighthorse. Thirdly is water that the tribe can identify that it has rights to that can reach Lake Powell. All 3 of those categories are intended to go eventually into the savings pool that the upper division states have identified for Lake Powell. The other 2 categories don't necessarily have to make it to the savings pool. The 4th category is one that we're calling deferred development. And the purpose of deferred development is that when the tribe develops water that is currently in the system, that takes water out of the system. That removes water from the Colorado River system. And so in order to maintain the health of the system and to ensure that the tribe's water stays into the system for a period of time that the tribe agrees to, the tribes would agree to defer development. The Ute Mountain Ute tribe agreed to not try to develop its Animas La Plata water. We would let that water bypass under this type of arrangement. That's the deferred development. That would give the people who are currently relying on the tribe's water, like I say, not specifically, no one is saying I'm using the tribe's water, but we know that's what's happening. But those users will know that that water is safe for them for that period of time, at least so long as the hydrology maintains. The last category is more of a catch-all. It's if there is water out there that the tribes can contribute to the system in one way or another, they would contribute to that. So I hope I've answered those three questions. We've identified three problems. We've tried to put those into the guidelines, and the actions that we will take would be to try to mitigate the impacts to the river for the tribe's use of its water. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Great, so my presentation is going to be it's going to eventually answer some of Tahlia's questions, but she asked me to take a step back and talk about the Northeastern Arizona Indian Water Rights Settlement. So to begin, I have to ask a few questions because as we go through this journey, our message develops and changes, so I'm going to be contradicting some things I have said in the past. So I need to know who was here a year ago. Hand raise. Oh, a lot of you. Okay. Who was at Colorado River Water Users Conference? Oh, a lot of you. Okay, and then who was in Tucson in April? Okay, just a few of you. So that's good because that's a. Okay, so let me go back to. A lot of you do know about the settlement, but with full disclosure, I'm going to go ahead and take a little bit of time to explain it because Mr. Cameron hasn't heard all of this. So go ahead and pop to the next slide. So this is our starting place. This is the Navajo world, right? And then others came along. So we have been, this settlement that is fully baked, except for this last piece, settles all of Navajo's water rights in Arizona. It is the big, beautiful water rights settlement. Go ahead to the next one. But where I want to start is with the tribal piece. So, and Mr. Cameron made a cute comment when we met with him yesterday. And it was so cute yesterday. We were going to meet with Mr. Cameron, and it was president and chairman. And President Yellowhair, I apologize, we didn't include you. It's just timing and scheduling. But it was so cute because Reclamation was like, are you guys coming in together? Is Hopi and Navajo coming in together? Yes, we are. That's point one. We did it, Hopi. And if you were at Crew, you heard me say the same thing. So many people were betting that we weren't going to resolve our water rights with each other. And that was the first thing we did. Now, how long have we been doing this? For a very long time, but I'll get into that story next. In addition, as we went through the process, so Navajo Nation entered into a treaty with the San Juan Southern Paiute in 2000. Is President Yellowhair? Hi, thank you for being here. In 2000. It needs to be ratified by Congress, and it hasn't been ratified by Congress yet. So the federal government came to us and said, well, let's address all three tribes. And so so three tribes are part of this settlement. Congress will recognize their treaty reservation, which will be a piece of, it will carve out areas around Tuba City. So it'll be the second reservation fully encompassed by the Navajo Nation, the first being the Hopi Nation. And then it also addresses water issues. And so what are we talking about here? We're talking about groundwater. We're talking about shared wash management with the Hopi tribe. I mentioned ratifying the treaty with San Juan Southern Paiute so that their reservation gets established. And importantly, for the wash management, for the Hopi Navajo Nation issues, where we're managing shared resources, we have a dispute resolution that importantly does not involve state court. You can go to the next slide. So this is phase two. So we got out of that negotiating room in October of 2023. And let me take a step back because it is so significant that the three tribes are working together. Because that is a reflection of history, right? And is Catherine in the room? We were talking about some of this intertribal issues yesterday. So I lost my train of thought there. Taking a step, my boss. I work for President Boo Nygren, who was here last year, and hopefully you remember his speech. What I remember most about that is, if you remember, he spoke in Navajo for about 5 minutes. And do you remember everyone kept getting a little more nervous and nervous and nervous? And then when he finally spoke in English, like the crowd went, oh, and people laughed because it was like this relief, like he's gonna talk to us in a language we understand. But he's the youngest president ever of the Navajo Nation. He's barely older than JB. But he grew up without running water. He's only 37 years old. So maybe in your world, that's significantly older, but in my world, you both are still quite young. He grew up without running water, 37 years old, right? Talks about how going to ASU was so significant because it was the first time he had running water in his life. And he came home, and he's raising his family home. And so I have very strict instructions. We're getting this done. We're getting this done. So that's my boss. So we get out of the negotiating room. Hopi and Navajo, San Juan San and Paiute isn't in the room yet. But we get into the negotiating room with the feds in the states, and Hopi and Navajo walks in with shared terms. And so many people applauded us for that, because again, they needed to know that we were serious. So my story here, because I need to tell the story, because I was having dinner with John and Mike last night. We were talking about Dad, because John went to law school with Dad. And yeah, stories. And so I was telling that in the negotiating room last year in 2024, Dave Brown stood up. Does anybody know Dave? It's because it's funnier if you know Dave, right? Oh, Catherine, you know. He stands up and he says, 30, because last night I said 20, 30 years ago, Herb, Becker, and I stood up and said, we need to settle this case. That was the Little Colorado River case. And I said, yes, Dave, we're gonna get it done, because my kids are not gonna be sitting in this chair. Like, we're not gonna pass it. Even if I wanted to pass it on to them, I don't think they wanna carry that ball. Because I think they wanna raise their kids with a thriving economy on the Navajo Nation, right? That's what water does. It creates a thriving economy. Okay, so what did we talk about in that room? We talked about more groundwater, the sea aquifer. And we talked about interbasin transfers, and we'll get to that. We talked about conditional leasing to participate in the state marketplace and to generate revenue for critical infrastructure. Let me get to those in the next round, because the point of this is showing the phases we're going through to get through this, to get to where we need to be. So you can go ahead and, all right. So the good news is last year in November, because by the terms of the agreement, because 39 parties signed it, including the governor of Arizona, at Tom Buchowski's advice, we now have what's called an effective settlement. So that allowed us to file a stay in the Little Colorado River adjudication while we seek congressional appropriation. You can go to the next. All right, so where are we at today? So let me bring you up to CRUA. Oh, well, let me bring you up to last year. If you remember Governor Lewis, I should have made that point in the very beginning, because it was very meaningful when Governor Lewis made the point several times congratulating President Nygren about reaching the settlement. It means a lot when it comes from another tribal leader, because we know, right? We know. Okay, so CRUA, did anybody see these stickers last year? Yes, JB was wearing one. It says consensus now, free Nawarsa. I won't talk about the free Nawarsa part. As Catherine says, buy me a beer, but don't buy me a beer, because I work for the tribe, so don't buy me a beer. But grab me at break and we can explain the free Nawarsa. But if you remember the free 6411, that's what that was calling out. So we went into CRUA really believing we were going to be able to get what we need. This is where we're at now. In order for Congress to vote on our settlement, they need the 7 basin states to sign what we call a consensus letter on Nawarsa, on this settlement. So it gets confusing because people talk about consensus on post-2026 and they talk about consensus on Nawarsa. It was so cute because we really thought we were gonna do it, and we had scheduled a day and time, and Tom literally said to me, Tom Buchowski, literally said to me that morning, so are we having the signing ceremony? I was like, Tom, we didn't get it across the finish line. But what we did was we listened and we heard what the concerns were coming from some of the seven states. And if you want to look, you can, this is all public record, go look them up, because they submitted comment letters last year as we went through the hearing process. So the big difference between December and today is we proposed taking the water that was allocated for Navajo Generating Station, largest coal-fired power plant west of the Mississippi, 34,100 acre-feet of water. We proposed taking that water, this is Upper Basin, Arizona water. And I'm sorry, but I have to tell the story because if Tom were here, he would tell you this story. This, in that second phase, in February of 2024, and this is really for everybody in the room, and this leads to the lessons learned. My only really big complaint from the last couple of years is we should not have learned in February 2024 that Central Arizona non-Indian agricultural water was being taken off the table. We should have learned that at least by October 2023. Because if, for those who don't know, water was set aside in the Arizona Water Settlements Act, I'm pointing at Jason, out of the NIA pool for Indian water rights settlements. So we thought we were going to be getting some lower basin water. And then it was pulled out from under us in February. And when Tom speaks, he talks about how difficult that time was. Because people thought it was, the settlement fell apart again. But it didn't. Navajo walked back into the room and we said, we're not leaving. And this is another lesson learned, generational shift. The Dave Browns of the world, the people who've been with us for 30 years, thanked us for saying we're not leaving the room. So what happened is we're no longer getting any, well, we have a very small amount of lower basin water. Now it shifts to the upper basin water. The reason we had the map up there wasn't to pick on Gila and show that they're not on the river, but was to show, if you don't know Navajo, we're in both basins. And we're settling our rights in Arizona. We're in the upper and lower basin. So we have to move water from the upper basin in Arizona to the lower basin just to serve the Navajo Nation, to serve the Hopi tribe, to get clean drinking water. That's what our settlement is, a classic Indian water rights settlement for clean drinking water. But in addition, it's that part in the second, it's the interbasin transfer in Arizona needing water to be moved to address the hydrology. So we, the Navajo Nation and Hopi, have agreed that while our infrastructure is being developed, we would like to lease water down into an existing marketplace and earn some revenue that will benefit the tribes. Is Leslie in the room? Because I was talking to Leslie yesterday. I saw her yesterday, yeah, and she was telling me about a tribe whose O&M fund is gone. Well, that's why we need to lease, right? And it's a marketplace solution, it's a win-win situation. And what's really critical, because you heard Peter kind of hint at that, our markets in the Four Corners area, you know, we can't compete with the market in Phoenix, right? I mean, it's an existing marketplace. Importantly, if you were paying attention to Catherine's presentation yesterday, this is not an assured water supply. These are not going to be 100-year leases, but it's going to be short-term 10, 20, 30-year leases, 40 years where like the Scottsdales of the world can take advantage of it. So those of you from Arizona know what I'm talking about, right? And we know that there is a ready market for it. We've talked to those people. And then, so that notion right there is what's creating some of the hiccups in getting to a 7 basin states consensus letter. So we listened to everybody. We came back and proposed taking the 34-1, splitting it in half, and for 20 years, leaving half in Lake Powell and what I'm calling the Nawarsa pool. If you pull out the legislation, which is HR 2025, it's not called the Nawarsa pool. I forget what it's called. But third lesson learned is language is important. We need to change that name. I forget what it is in the settlement, but we're going to propose calling it the Nawarsa pool. So 1750 will go into this pool every year for 20 years. And then the other half we will lease, and then after 20 years, we'll continue leasing. So that's where we're at. I need to thank the 7 basin states because they are meeting with us. We meet with them once to twice a month, and that's remarkable given their schedule, because they are nonstop post-2026. So very much appreciate them meeting with us and working through this. So here's where I'm going to contradict myself. If you go ahead and go to the next one. So there's our settlement, there's the numbers, you can go read press, you can read it all, you can read about this all in S953 and HR 2025. So if you were at Tucson, there's another little box that said the Nuarsa pool is not post-2026. We've taken that out. And let me be super clear, well, as clear as mud. We had been told from the beginning, some of the states were not going to address our issue until post-2026 was done. Well, picking up on the dean's theme from yesterday about resilience, us resilient folks were not going to accept that. So we kept pushing and pushing. And well, the calendar is what the calendar is. So our Nuarsa pool is a settlement pool, right? Our settlement is forever and ever. This is why we were so insistent it's not post-2026, because post-2026 is for a definite time period, right? It's gonna be 5, 10, 15, 20 years, but it's not gonna be for infinity, which is what our settlement is. And so we need to protect our Indian water rights settlement. But why we deleted the it's not post-2026 is because you're talking about pools, right, in post-2026. And so the thinking that's going behind our Nuarsa pool can assist the negotiators as they're thinking about their pools. And you heard Peter discuss some of the pools. Okay, so that's where we're at on Northeastern Arizona water rights, how this particular is now helping post-2026 versus literally, I think 6 weeks ago, JBA was like, it's not, it is. It's helping develop the thinking around pools and moving water where it's needed in short periods of time and getting win-wins, right? This is about win-win-win for communities. I think I'll wait for my other stuff until question and answer because I think I took enough time. Thanks, Tahlia.
So, I'll touch on the lessons learned and communities' actions, and but before that, a little context, just a little background on the Central Arizona Project tribes. You're right, we're not on that. Reminds me of Groucho Marx, wouldn't want to be part of a club that would have me. So, I don't know, JB, do you know who Groucho is? We're all picking on JB.
I'm not picking on him, I'm raising him up.
So, so Central Arizona Projects, I think a brief history on that in terms of tribes. So during the Carter administration, into the Carter administration, that administration decided to first contract with tribes, and about half of that Central Arizona Project water was set aside for tribal contracts or kind of future water settlements, which surprised some in Arizona who didn't have contracts yet. But it did start kind of a framework for settling claims within Central Arizona and elsewhere, using Colorado River water, lower priority Colorado River water that would come through the Central Arizona Project. So there's been a number of settlements that have been put in place. It's important to understand that not all CAP tribes are the same in the sense that some have settled their claims using CAP water, but they don't get direct delivery of that CAP water. A lot of that water is leased to municipalities or other water users. And so when we're talking about CAP tribes, some tribes don't have a lot of skin in the game in the sense that, look, someone else is bearing the risk of potential cuts. So they're not as involved or engaged. They're kind of interested, but what's going to happen in the next 10 to 20 years really is no concern for them because their leases typically are 100 years long, and the expiration dates will be after the next guideline. So they're kind of on the sidelines, interested, not that involved. Then you have a number of direct use tribes that Gila River is the biggest. You have Acadian. I don't necessarily consider Acadian CAP in the sense because they don't have project water. They actually have P3 water. It's just wheeled through the Central Arizona project system. So they kind of are more protected in terms of their priority. You have the Tohono Nation has substantial water rights. Then you have a number of tribes that have not fully leased out their water rights and do benefit, get some financial benefit so they're interested as well. But Gila River is the big one, and really before they settled their claims, Gila River was the 10,000-pound gorilla in Central Arizona. It had a claim to the Colorado River, or to the Gila River, I should say, and its tributaries of 2.1 million acre feet. Its settlement, ultimately approved in Congress in 2004, established a water budget of 653,500 acre feet. So it was substantially less. Half of that, roughly 311,800 acre feet, is CAP water, which makes it the single largest entitlement holder of Central Arizona project water. So it's very much involved in these discussions because it has to be, and unlike any other tribe, and there may be some other tribes, but smaller amounts, and they don't necessarily use it directly. Not all, in times of shortage, not all of those rights are firmed. And so it is facing serious and real cuts and is very engaged in the process because it has to be. So I can just point out the Gila River is different because of that, and because they're different, they're very much engaged. Some lessons learned. I think there's been a lot of comments about from different perspectives. Governor Lewis mentioned some of those. I think what's important to know, in my sense, is that the new guidelines will really reflect what can get done today. What can we agree to today? And it's not going to fully stabilize the river or the system, I don't believe. And so we're going to have to anticipate future discussions once those, whatever they turn out to be, are approved, to address the crisis of the day and the future, whatever that would be. And so we're going to have the space or the ability to consider other actions. And that's why it's important in the EIS process is to include a lot of different potential actions that probably won't make it into the new guidelines, but we want to study them because we may need to rely on those in the future. And I think what I've observed a little bit in the conversations and the negotiations is some people are triggered by some of these ideas. And I think some of us have to kind of, like Gila River doesn't like the idea of priority cuts, but we recognize you gotta model that. You have to look at the impacts of those. And I think I would urge those that don't like some of the ideas to recognize they need to be analyzed. You need to understand the impacts because 10 years from down the road, 5 years down the road, you may need to rely on something that you may change your mind. And I think that's something it's important to keep in mind as we go forward. I think risk and crisis will change people's attitudes. And if we're entering into a really, really poor hydrology, we're all gonna have to do more. So just keep that in mind. I think the guidelines will be something that we can agree on today, but they won't be the silver bullet. The other thing I think is conservation works. The idea, these pool ideas and concepts, I think there's a lot of agreement on them of creating additional tools to protect, whether it's to protect critical elevations, it's to pre-store cuts, offset future cuts. Many are in the conversation of pools are thinking about how those pools might be used, and Gila River is too. But we're more focused on how do you create the pools? And I think one source of water where you create the pools, and Bidtah touched on this, is tribal water rights. Compensating tribes through short-term leases, 20-year leases or something like that, or programs that Peter was talking about, to help create these pools. And that's not that other water users won't be able to do it, but I think tribal water rights are available, and I think Gila River is very much encouraging other tribes to consider that in terms of creating pools that has a public benefit, not just setting aside water to store that you as a water you can use later, but a tool that reclamation or the basin states can use to better manage the river. And that's something we're advocating for. And I think just to touch on Gila River's meaningful action, we provide an alternative. We've looked at lots of good ideas, sent in lots of letters about tweaking those good ideas, raising issues with ideas I think were problematic, but we've been very open to and very supportive of reclamation, considering all types of actions or potential actions. So we had a wide range of analysis. So when we have to face the next crisis after the guidelines are in place, we're not having to go back and do a full-blown EIS again. We need to be able to have those potential actions already studied, because we won't have a lot of time often when we're facing really bad hydrology. So I think I'll leave it there because I think I'm more interested in answering questions, but just wanted to touch on that. So thank you.
All right. So Jay Weiner, water lawyer, Quechan Indian tribe. It is my honor and privilege to represent the tribe. That has shaped my perspective on the basin, but I will caveat this with, though I do represent the tribe and that is my perspective, what I am saying today are my opinions and should not necessarily be blamed on my client. So I am last on this panel because part of it is that we set this up geographically, right? We've moved from the upper basin across the tribe that straddles the basin lines to central Arizona and now to the lower river. And we do that in part because it is a way to illustrate the fact, and we've touched on this in various ways. The tribes on the river are differently situated. They have different interests, they have different needs, they have different geographies, they have different cultures, they have different histories, they have different water rights, they have different neighbors. And so I know Daryl Vigil is famous for saying, if you know one tribe, you know one tribe. And that is absolutely true. And one of the things I think that the lessons that many of us have learned, certainly the ones sitting at this table, because I think the point that Jason made about the varying levels of engagement is dead on, is that we need to protect ourselves. I mean, what Jason was alluding to about people being triggered by certain proposals, to put a fine point on it, is the question of modeling priority cuts versus pro rata cuts. Priority cuts are not acceptable to Gila River because of the risk they're at. Pro rata cuts are not acceptable to the Quechan tribe because we have Arizona versus California water rights, and we've got a Supreme Court injunction that commands the United States to deliver our water irrespective of state lines in time of shortage. And so we agree, however, that we are going to need to come out of this with a framework that is supple enough to deal with the next crisis, which we may be in on day one, depending on how next winter performs, but certainly will come at some point. And what that means, I think, that we need, one of the key lessons learned, at least from Quechan's perspective, is that building an agreement that allows the maximum amount of space for transactional flexibility is essential. We will not be able to put in place specific water allocation arrangements between now and the end, and when we need the post-2026 place to come in to figure out how we are going to manage water and how we're going to allocate all of the pain that is inevitably coming by the gallon. And what we will need to have as part of the rules of the road, therefore, is a system that is flexible enough to allow us to be creative. Because I think one of the things and one of the lessons learned, and I appreciate the fact that the basin states, other stakeholders in the basin, NGO communities are recognizing this. One of the things I think is different from where we were in the 2007 guidelines and where the basin has been for the last 103 years is that you have specific tribes stepping up from their individual perspectives to try to bring solutions to these problems. And some of those solutions conflict. Some of those ideas are different. Some of those things are things that one set of tribes can support that are problematic for others. When we talk about pool concepts, for example, I know at Quechan and those of us on the river in the lower basin are concerned that if we are going to have upper basin pools, it's got to be real water in them. It can't just be taking water and painting it a different color. And that is an important issue. It's a piece of where, when Peter was touching on deferred development agreements, that's a really important concept to be able to find a way to help relieve pressure on the river system. Because for so long as conserved consumptive use is the only coin of the realm, That puts tribes at a significant disadvantage unless you're going to force us to actually have to go develop more water, which is the opposite direction that the system as a whole is trying to move in. And so that requires a decision space and transactional flexibility to find other ways to drive value to tribes beyond simply having to put a new acre foot of water to use. That's a hard concept for a basin reared on prior appropriation. And I know people talk about the compact and it's prior appropriation, but prior appropriation is part of what we live with. And I think it's and that's really one of the things I think Quechan has tried to bring to the table, because we are uniquely situated. Because of a set of very historically contingent circumstances, in part because the tribe fought for 50 years with first the United States and then the state of California and their California stakeholders over the fact that when the United States brought claims on behalf of the Quechan tribe in Arizona versus California, they did it based on their assessment of a reservation that we believe was improperly diminished. And we had that fight with the feds in the 50s and 60s, and the feds did what they did, and we continue to have that fight with the feds because for Quechan, this is a generational project. In 1978, the United States saw the light and changed their position, which led to a couple decades of litigation with California over this question of what the proper boundaries of the Quechan reservation are, and whether, therefore, we had additional PIA claims that were not initially included in the 64 decree. We went up and down the courts. We won some, we lost some. It was still a live issue. We had a special master ruling, the Supreme Court ruling, to keep the issue alive and to make it clear that we had not waived that issue by participating in the Indian Claims Court process in 99 and 2000. Bill Hazenkamp told the story yesterday of California's near-death experience with the QSA. And while California was trying to figure out how to live within the 4-4, Quechan is sitting out there as a potential liability because we at that point had claims that we believed were valid and unquantified. And what that ultimately led to is a settlement that we did in 2005 with the state of California, with the United States, with Coachella Valley Water District, with Metropolitan Water District, that put a number to the tribe's unquantified PIA, which was 20,000 acre feet in California on top of what had been decreed in 64. And recognizing that if Quechan was going to put 20,000 acre feet of water to use, that was not going to help California live within the 4-4, we built into that settlement what we call a forbearance agreement. That it talked about needing to find new language. Forbearance is a complicated word in the basin. It means different things to different people. But the gist of it is that we agreed that of the 20,000, we could access 13,000 acre feet immediately, and the other 7,000 starting in 2035. But that in any given year in which the tribe did not divert that 13,000 and that it flowed to Met through the priority system, Met would compensate the tribe. And so the same drop of water became capable of providing multiple values and multiple benefits without increasing consumptive demand on the system. And there are all kinds of fights people want to have over off-reservation transactions, particularly for Indian water. But if we are going to have a sustainable solution in the post-2026 world, and by a sustainable solution, I think to pick up on Jason's point, it really is one that is going to have to be prepared for crisis management, because if we go back to Brad's presentation yesterday, we've got an asteroid coming at us, we should look up. We need to have the space built in to be flexible. And if that is things that we need Congress to do, if that is we need people to take a different look at what the Indian Non-Intercourse Act does and does not actually mean, if that means we explore the authority that the Interior Department already has under Section 2, there are ways that we can bring to fruition some of the ideas that tribes are trying to put forward to help the basin solve these problems and to help ourselves and to protect our interests and our communities and our economies. But we can only do that if we're going to work creatively. I think that really is the core lesson learned that I would offer.
Thank you so much, Jay. Is this working? Okay. All right. I do have some follow-up questions that I wanted to ask. So, we've heard a bit about, the tribal pools and the categorization of water. And I'm wondering, in the past, we've also heard about the 4 U's, the uncompensated, undeveloped, unused, and unquantified tribal water. And I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about how the thinking has evolved from the 4Us. And maybe we can start with Peter and then go to Bidtah.
Thank you. The 4Us were derived from a meeting that the Upper Basin tribes had with the Upper Division states in Chama in April of 2024. We signed a historical MOU at that time that basically said that the Upper Division states were going to work with the Upper Basin tribes to protect tribal water rights and to keep the system healthy. And the tribes would be involved in decision-making. We'd receive notice of meetings and such things, and we'd participate. And that's been going really well. At that meeting, Chairman Manuel Hart of the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe, he brought up the 4Us and unquantified, unused, undeveloped, and uncompensated. And those are 4 classifications of water. Sometimes one body of water can actually meet more than one a qualification. And I know that there's a little confusion sometimes about what some of those mean. The unquantified would be sort of the tribal water rights that we're pursuing in New Mexico and Utah for Ute Mountain. Right now, we don't know how much water that's going to be. We have a guess, we have a fair estimate of how much that would be, but it hasn't been quantified yet. Hasn't been part of a settlement, hasn't been, it's really just in discussion right now. So that's unquantified. And then unused would be sort of like what I described earlier with the tribe's ALP water. The water that was not put in storage, the water that just flows by every year, that's unused. It's also undeveloped. The tribe does have some water that it can use. For instance, it's filled the Lake Nighthorse, but it can't develop that water. So that water is used, but undeveloped. And then for uncompensated, that's what we were talking about earlier, about how there's certain tribal water rights that the tribe is not able to receive compensation for whatever reason, in a program or something else. And I think what we've come to understand as we have pursued further in categorizing water and trying to understand how the water can contribute to the system, that the unquantified water is really not playing any significant role. It's not being modeled by reclamation, of course, because they don't always know what that is. There are estimates, like I said, but they're not modeling it. It's not playing any role in really in negotiations or in discussions about compensation or in any of the other 3 categories. So I think that's one of the things we've come to. And on the unused and undeveloped, I think we're understanding what that means, why tribes can't use it, why they can't develop it, what are the obstacles to that. And I think that's a healthy discussion to have because tribes want to use their water. Ute Mountain could lease its water, but it doesn't. It uses its water. In fact, it leases other people's water. The farm that the tribe has is one of the most advanced farms in the nation, and it does tremendous work. It's hiring employees, hiring tribal members. It's bringing revenue to the tribe. And so the tribe needs more water. And the fact that it has 16,000 acre feet bypassing one of its projects every year is very, very frustrating. And it's also very difficult for the tribe to lease that water. That water has to be used in Colorado. And so if you understand where Lake Nighthorse is in Colorado, it's not far from the state line. And then when the water comes back into Colorado at Four Corners, again, it only stays in Colorado for about a mile. And the only entity that could possibly lease at Four Corners is the tribe itself, because that water is entirely on tribal land. So those opportunities really don't exist for Ute Mountain. And so that's why we're trying to understand what does it mean for the tribe not be able to use that water, not to be able to develop it, and how do we help the tribe gain something from that water in the meantime? And that's where the compensation comes in. So we're starting to understand how to combine all these concepts and which ones have greater weight. You know, in those categories that we did of the 3 types of water that will reach the savings pool, those are different values of water. And so we don't know yet what that will look like, how that will work out. But we understand that that there's various types of tribal water that has various types of purposes and various types of benefits to the system. And so I was really grateful for Chairman Hart for bringing the 4Us up. It really made us think about what that is and why we need to understand tribal water. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you could throw up the slide. So is Erica here? Erica, text me. I don't know where you are. Oh, great. Okay, there you are. literally yell at me if you don't want me to say this. So Erica is our water rights attorney. She works for the Department of Justice. If you haven't met her, Navajo Nation, you got to meet her because she made the slides that I just showed you. I could never have done that. She's JB's age. She can do that stuff. So what I was going to say, Erica, if you don't want me to, is another. So I'm getting back to this, like, we've had such a hard time. Is NMARSA post-2026? Is it not? And one of the reasons, as recently as 6 weeks ago, I was saying it's not, is because, and this is another lesson learned, it's confusing to people. It's confusing to people. Yeah, you're okay with that. So so we wanted to draw this great big thick line, and we are not post-2026, and we're just about NMARSA. But the calendar's a calendar. And so Navajo came up with this when we realized, okay, we got to stop just doing what we're doing and switch our game. These are the categories we came up with and presented them to the Upper Basin tribes. And so I want to make sure we're all on the same page, which is we're talking as if this is completely defined and we know, no, this is all developing literally as we speak. I'm texting one of our experts because he's still not completely comfortable with deferred, right. We are literally, so let me
still working it out.
We're still working it out. But I think that what the lesson learned is we have water to bring to the table, but it all has different flavors and different types and different colors and different this, that, and the other thing. So Navajo developed these to try to help bring the conversation in our minds to a place where all the 7 basin states could hear us. Because you saw where we are located. We are the unicorn, right? We say this all the time. The compact wasn't created with Navajo in mind. And so we have a settlement with Arizona. We have to hear Arizona. And so you heard Peter say this loud and clear. When we came up with the categories, category E is unquantified water. And he said, that's not what we're talking about anymore for the pools, right? But there was a time people were talking about that, and all we were hearing from the lower basin was, what, right? And now we're saying, no, we're gonna take that off the table. So when, Erica will help me redo this, when we do the slide, we need to kind of dash out E. But we have to keep it as a category to remind folks, there are tribes like Navajo, 400, and this is an important number, 422,000 members as of yesterday. What is your membership?
About 2,100.
2,100.
23,000.
About 4,000.
422,000. How different are we up here, right? I mean, what we're facing a different issue than we're all facing different issues on our reservations. So we threw these categories together, and these are very Navajo-centric. But you already heard Peter describe A and B. So category A is easy. You're using it, you curtail it. And the reason I'm raising this is because Peter's talked a lot about their farm project, and many tribes have BIA irrigation projects, right? So we have NIP, Navajo Indian Irrigation Project. I'm not going to take you down that path, but that's another great story. It's not fully built out. It's not fully built out. But it was passed at the same time as San Juan Chaman diversion was passed. And so you can imagine how our members feel. So category A is curtailed tribal uses or infrastructure improvements, conservation. B, this is where we're trying to push the envelope and get people like in the lower basin comfortable with this. So this is water. We talk about NGS, but that doesn't apply to most people. So let's think about some irrigation projects where you might have been using water, but the system's failing. You're not using it anymore. Maybe in the last 10 years, we don't know the time period, but it's recently used, and it will be used today, and it will eventually be used. So is that a category of water that we can put in a pool and get compensation for? So the considerations on the side are all the things we have to work through to get as this thing is baking in the oven. So this is where our expert is just like, no, this is about NIP. are, it's funny, anyway, it's funny if you know what we're talking about. Water associated with an authorized project and having a secretarial water contract that is not used today, that's NIP. We have a contract with the secretary to take water for NIP, but we can't use that water because the project hasn't been built out. And I still don't fully understand why we're disagreeing, but I think, Jay, it has to do with storage and whether storage is recognized in our contract. So, and why am I saying this in front of you? Because the devil's in the details. And the other reason I'm saying this in front of you is I really just want to keep hammering away, because I very much appreciate Mr. Cameron's consistent comment that you all are different and you all have different situations. And it's the devil's in the details, and each tribe has to figure out how to make their situation work to come to the table. And said another way, because I really want to highlight Mr. Quechan, because so much great work has come out of this university, but so much great work also came out of the University of Mexico, where Mr. Quechan was trained. And two things: Fred Hart, the great Fred Hart, this total Irish Catholic from Boston who just ended up in New Mexico, so smart, right? So brilliant, helping Indian people. And he just says one day, the problem with Indian law is it's federal in nature. And he's right? Because that's why we can't solve problems, because it's not a one size fits all. The other thing I want to point out is what they did, back in the 60s and 70s is they republished the original federal Cohen handbook. And so we were talking about that last night. What's old is new. Like sometimes you got to remind people, we've already kind of had these great thoughts, let's just bring them back to the table. And so, because I think what I'm saying there, I think the big lesson is we can, this is all solvable, right? We can solve this. We probably already know the solutions. We just got to figure out how to get people talking in the right place.
And if I could, Jason, go ahead.
You want to jump in?
Tahlia,
I think we both do.
Just on
Yeah, jump in.
a CAP detail. So CAP water or tribal water users, and Gila River being one of those, most, if not all of them, have fully developed their water rights. So the 311,800 acre feet of the community's entitlement, they've fully developed it. So category A, a lot of tribes participate, CAP tribes participate in that category A. It's, you're basically a history of consumptive use, direct use, or full development. And so it's more easy, they're more easily able to participate in the current rules and to do conservation. So I just want to point that out.
And to build on that, I think the other piece, and one of the places that we are still talking to each other as tribes, and part of where we are still trying to get on the same page as Bidtah and Peter were alluding to about understanding these concepts, is that from a lower basin perspective, reclamation helped shape some of that conversation through the Bucket 1 and Bucket 2 programs using the IRA funding, right? You are eligible for Bucket 1 if you have conserved consumptive use of water that has a recent period of use. 3 of the last 5 years tends to be the rules of the road in the lower basin for those programs. And so that created a market and it created some sideboards. And so A is easy because that's exactly what they did, what we did, putting money into those programs in Bucket 1. As well as Bucket 2 really is the infrastructure improvements that reduce water consumption. So that again slots easily into what we are more familiar with in the lower basin. B, I think, is a space for conversation about what a reasonable look back period is. And the reason the reasonable look back period becomes important is that, at least from my lower basin river tribe perspective, we strongly support and want to be supportive of making sure that there are tools and mechanisms available for upper basin tribes to be able to do what they want and need to do with their water rights. But once we start talking about these pool concepts, we are not comfortable if there in the pools is not going to be real water, because that will impact what comes across to the lower basin. And that's not just a lower basin state issue, that's a lower basin tribe issue. And where Jason's and my clients are differently situated and have different perspectives on pro rata priority, we still need as much water coming to the lower basin as we can get. And so we want to be in a place that we can be supportive of what the upper basin tribes want, but we can only do that if we can all get on the same page. And again, to reiterate, I think one of the things that is happening incredibly constructively, and I think is new to the basin, is a whole lot of direct, unmediated intertribal dialogue.
Yeah.
That is really, part of why I think we are coming forward with these things, part of why and we're being polite here, and we all like and respect each other, but like, we're airing a little bit of laundry in front of you because these are the conversations we're having with ourselves. There are real discussions happening, and we would love to see more of that at the basin state principal level.
Well, yeah, right. I was gonna say, said another way, we're as sophisticated as the mainstream. But that's an important point, right? I mean, Catherine and I were talking about that last night. There aren't people who see us that way, right? And it's so fun working with Erica because she's, again, a young person and she's seeing it. Some of the reason we're having these spirited debates is because we have people who Peter and I, up until recently, Peter was in-house, you get to understand the client and the needs in such a deep way. And you have to translate that into the capitalist system that the other Peter was talking about yesterday. But the reason I wanted to jump in, and I'll pass it back to you, Tahlia, is that what we're really, the reason I brought up Fred and the problem is federal Indian law is general. In all of my work, the answer for tribes is always, you gotta be flexible and you gotta provide opportunities. And we can't, and that's where we get so hung up with federal rules. And you can't do that when, as you heard Jay yesterday, you have, Frank's the only one in his program. I mean, one dude running everything, right?
Imagine if we could clone him.
Right. But I'm digressing a little bit, but I'm really trying to drive that home because in my lifetime, I have felt this wave of like, wow, people are taking me a little more seriously now than when we started. So that's good. That's the generational shift that creates progress.
We're learning from you.
Plus, we're old now.
We are old.
Well, I wanted to kind of jump in, Jay, to what you had mentioned about intertribal dialogue and to ask a little bit more, the panelists, a little bit more about that. So, we're seeing a lot more tribal engagement and innovation. Can you give more examples of collaboration that the tribes are doing, either with the feds or states or other water users or other tribes?
Sure. I mean, I think there are multiple examples there. I mean, obviously, going back to, and Jason can talk to this better than I can, but DCP does not happen without Gila River stepping up to help Arizona get to where it needed to be. You have multiple tribes in the lower basin participating in the I can't remember which, the lower basin plan. So we had DCP 500 plus in the lower basin plan. You've got multiple tribes putting water into that. You have ICS, as Jason just said too. I mean, there's been significant direct wet water contributions to the systems from tribes where the tools have been available. I mean, one of the issues with the interim guidelines and the way the ICS program was set up was that after the initial set of ones were done, you needed permission from every single ICS contractor to be able to create new ICS, and that became a significant barrier to entry. That made it hard for tribes to participate. It made it hard for others to participate. I mean, so when I'm talking about transactional flexibility, my focus is on Quechan and on the tribal space, but as Bidtah just said, we're part of this basin and our issues are not unique, and you can Venn diagram a whole lot of this. So there are those pieces there. I mean, at Quechan for a while, we were working to do an intertribal restoration project using some Quechan water on Cocopa land. Ran into some roadblocks about trying to do that transfer, and to Audubon's credit, they got some NIFWF money and they're doing the project with Cocopa, which is great. But I mean, I've got a 27-page memo with a bunch of legal theories as to why that should be completely cool to do, and was not previously able to get traction with the United States on that. And if we are moving into a more flexible decision space, there are a whole bunch of existing authorities that can get looked at and interpreted through less rigid lenses to facilitate that process. I think there's a lot of tribal dialogue about how we can do some of those things.
I think I'll just add on some of the innovation to build on the community's experience in the DCP. Gila River, somewhat fortunate in the sense that it was already in the middle of a huge irrigation project, construction project, or a settlement. And so we've been able to lean into funding for water efficiency projects because we were already designing facilities and had a number of projects on the shelf, but we didn't have full funding under our settlement. We were going to max out the settlement. So when the new money came in for actual long-term efficiency projects, the bucket 2, we were able to step in right away and get those funded. And so reclaimed water pipeline, the community has an exchange of A+ reclaimed water in Arizona for CAP water, and it's able to exchange that water. And we had this pipeline where we were able to move it to about 90, so now it could be used about 95% of the reservation, where before it was only kind of the west end of the reservation, more like 25% of the reservation in terms of irrigated ag land. We have Solar River Canal, which is kind of the famous, but an important project, because one of the things we're doing to be less reliant on CAP water is more reliant on underground water, which our electricity bill for pumps goes up. So having Solar River Canal not only has some efficiency, water savings, but it also reduces our load and reduces our costs, our annual operating costs. And we have a number of other projects that were mostly canal lining or capturing excess flows in our irrigation system. So the community is doing a lot to better manage water, to be as efficient as possible, and really to adjust to the new normal. And I think one of the things we were somewhat shocked about is we figured a lot of people were doing that and thinking about it, and we were a little disappointed that we didn't see a lot of other projects ready to go. And I think what that's shown is that some water users just haven't been thinking about it in a real way, having to change behavior. And I think that will have to change and is changing it. But they need to design those projects, think about them, and it's taking longer for others to do that. And that's tribal, but also non-tribal.
If I could also add one more thing that I should have mentioned. I think one of the other places that you've really seen increased collaboration is between tribes and states. We talked about Lorelei yesterday chairing the Colorado River Board up here. Former President Jordan Joaquin is the first Native member of the Colorado River Board of California, which has done tremendous things because of our partnerships with the state of California and the way that the California state parties have really welcomed Quechan into that tent. We have much greater access and insight into the California state process. We are able to directly engage to insert our ideas into that California process to try to bring some of those solutions forward. And I know, everyone sitting here, Peter talked about the UCRC agreement. All of us sitting here talk to our state counterparts very regularly. Talk to the states, talk to the feds. There's a level of engagement and dialogue that we have very deliberately invested in. And we are receiving reciprocity from states in ways that is also new that I think they really deserve some credit for.
Yeah, I want to riff off of that because I think your question also is geared at, okay, so for the tribes listening, what are some tangibles you can take away? 100% on talk to your state, talk to your county, talk to the local huge municipality, right? Talk to Catherine at Phoenix. That's why you see on considerations, who's the actor? The Army, talk to the Army. Maybe there'll be some money. Who's gonna pay for this? But at the same time, don't forget the tried and true. So yesterday, people were going on and on. There was no tribal involvement in the drought contingency plan of 2007. And I was incensed because I was like, I was in meetings because we asked for consultation. Don't forget consultation, tribes. But I want to go through that story because it was 2007. Our first settled water right wasn't until 2009. So for those of you lawyers, remember the original Navajo pleading was about NEPA? Remember that? It ended up being about whatever it ended up being about.
Some sort of train wreck.
Right.
Hey, I think it's fairly narrow, but we'll talk about that one offline.
I do too.
Hey, the groundwater line is a great one.
No question.
No question.
No question.
But my point of the story is until you have quantified, settled, adjudicated, whatever term, whatever it is that your tribe is doing, it's hard to bring water to the table. So what we were talking about in 2007, and the reason I was so surprised yesterday, tribes were incensed, because I just remember being in these meetings with the feds, and then because I'm so old, it was like, oh, right, we were meeting at Navajo, and they were such good feds. We had bought sandwiches, and they had all brought their little sandwiches. They couldn't eat it because they can't take our food. But they were so, and Leslie was saying this yesterday, we just didn't know, right? And they were struggling, how. So the argument we were making at the time is through the NEPA process, even though we don't have quantified settled rights, you as feds need to be including them. But that becomes tough questions for modelers and legal people and scientists because they want the piece of paper that says what you have, right? So I just want to remind everybody that the consultation tool is very powerful and you should be taking advantage of it. But again, I also want to be historic about this and get into the details of why haven't tribes been at the table. If you don't have quantified rights, it's very hard to have a conversation.
Or you're trying to get your settlement into enforceability, so you're focused on that.
Or you've got
Right.
or you've got really senior water rights in fairly full reservoirs and you're not at risk.
Yeah.
A million
This is 20 years
reasons,
ago.
and now I want to talk about NGS. I mean, like, and we have other reasons.
I will take, a lot of the concerns the community had was not so much 2007 interim guidelines, it was the development of the lower basin DCP, which really was done just between the 3 lower basin states and the United States before any consultation with tribes. So that was a different matter.
Agreed.
So,
You want to know what our meetings are like?
They're long.
You know, tribes have different capacities, and so they approach issues in different ways, and collaboration is really important. We learn from each other, and it's also important that we hear from each other. You know, it means a lot to Ute Mountain to hear what Jay says about the pools and how those pools are supposed to work and what water should go into those pools. It took us a while to understand what this new water concept is and how important that is to the lower basin tribes. And so we learned all that, though, through these meetings that we have and through these collaborations that we have. And we also work together by agreements. We form, you know, there's going to have to be a lot of agreements implemented after, I don't know when we're going to start to do it, but after we know how this is all going to operate, we're going to have to change things. The legislation is going to have to change, and we're going to have to agree with each other how to do things. And that's going to require all of us working together to come up with those kinds of solutions. Agreements have to be consistent. The legislation is all going to have to be consistent. It's going to have to reflect what we really want. And it's going to need that diversity to make sure that in the future, we're not doing some piece of legislation or some agreement or some conclusion in the EIS that prevents us from doing the type of things that we need to do in the future that we may not even know about right now. We need that flexibility. And so working together with Ute Mountain works very closely with its legislators, both its federal and state legislators, to try to get rules in place and to get decisions in place that benefit the tribe and benefit other tribes in the region. And so there's a collaborative effort that goes just beyond the groups that we have, which are several. I mean, I think I'm in meetings with these folks and with other people probably 5 or 6 times a week. And if it's not directly with the tribes, it's inadvertently with the tribes. I'm meeting with another group that wants to talk about tribes. And I can really only talk about Ute Mountain in specific, but I think we all try to make sure that when we're educating folks about what the tribal issues, that we include all the tribes in it. We can speak specifically about our own, and no 2 tribes are alike. But at the same time, though, there are certain things that we can talk about that I think are fairly consistent. Like, for instance, tribes exist for their members. I am almost certain that every single tribal leader in here or who's been here in front of you in the past, he exists or she exists for the purpose of protecting their tribal members. That's the goal. Everything they do is to improve the lives of their tribal members. If that means increasing resources, that means economic development, if that means making certain sacrifices for a water settlement, if that's what's better for their people, that's what they'll do. And that's an interesting focus. I don't envy the states who have the same priorities. It's their people too. And they're the states represent a diverse, wide group of interests. The tribe is maybe a little narrower. I mean, tribal members are all different. They're all diverse. They have their own things that they want to bring to the table. I don't envy the states and what they have to go through. And that sort of frees up the tribes to be able to come up with solutions that we think are answering big questions. And so in a way, it's easier for us to do that, I think. But it's also helpful for us to be able to do that. The tribes are sincere. They're coming to you with real, genuine, honest answers about what they think we need to have in the Colorado River system operations. And I'm glad that people are hearing this. I think they are finally paying a lot more attention to what's going on with the tribes. I think that's in large part due to just the sensitivities generally of the of the non-Indians wanting to be more respectful of the tribes. I think it's also because the tribes are being effective. We're really bringing some effective solutions to the table. When we participate in these discussions with other organizations, the tribes don't just sit and listen. The tribes actually bring concepts and they bring ideas and they participate in a robust fashion. So I love working with these guys. I mean, they teach me so much. I mean, you can just hear the things that they're talking about. When I understand what they're saying, I learn a lot.
Can I add one thing to what you're saying, Peter? I think the other valuable thing, really from a Gila River perspective, because we want to get to a consensus. We want to get to yes. And you can't get to yes until you know what everyone's no's are. Right. And you can't do that unless you're talking and trying to understand the needs of the other water users, tribal water users, or others. So it's very valuable to be able to share that information, position, and then understand others' positions, so you can think about ways that you can move the process forward and try to get to yes, because that's where we need to get to.
And if I can just build on that, and I think we had this conversation Tuesday afternoon, but part of the importance of both understanding others' positions and part of the importance of having the conversations is that everyone has heard at one point in time or another someone say the tribes need to be at the table, right? But if you're at the table and you say, here's what I need, and someone says no, you haven't accomplished a lot by being at the table. But what the conversation really needs to be about is, here's what we need, here's how we think we can get there. If that doesn't work for you, understand our needs and think about how else we can do it in a way that works for you as well. Mm-hmm. And that really is, I mean, that is the spirit in which this conversation, for example, about water categories and pools is being done, but that needs to happen more broadly to think about how we're going to integrate these things. Mm-hmm. Because we can't do this in a yes-no binary. And we know that. We're all of us in the basin, we are making this up as we go along. We have past examples. We know what has not worked. We have some things that have been useful. And the question is, what can we really do going forward? And that is only going to work if we genuinely try to understand each other, if probably we all get a little bit less sensitive about language people use. The number of trigger words we have right now is a little crazy. But like understanding why words are triggering and understanding the interests behind them, not just the positions and the things the lawyers want to fight about, but like, as Peter said, what is it that we need to do for our tribes want to do to protect their members? What is it that all of the stakeholders in this basin ultimately want to do to be able to preserve and enhance the way of life that everyone wants in a stochastic climate and a time of great change?
Thank you so much. Well, I think this is a good segue to go to the audience Q&A, so I'm going to hand it off to Celine and Jason.
Very much, Tahlia. Mike's working. Morning, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Thanks for filling the queue with questions. Watching that queue fill up is like a horse race, which questions are going to get the most votes. But that's a indirect way of saying, hey, if you're willing to, not only drop your ideas and your questions in the queue, but look at what others have dropped in and give it a thumbs up if you're interested. Celine and I pay close attention to the questions that are most of interest to you by looking at those thumbs up. So if you're willing to give to the whole community by offering that input in addition to whatever question you may have, we'd be grateful for that. We have some really good questions. Yeah. And as with all things, I'll have to moderate them, and we'll never get through all of them. But there's one that really rose to the top concerning, to lead into it in broad-based ways, the use of tribal water through whatever flexibility mechanism as system water, to have tribal water put towards system water through whatever flexibility mechanism. So I'll just read the question. What does the risk-reward calculus look like for tribal nations that elect to defer on reservation water use in favor of propping up the Colorado River system?
I mean, at core, it depends on the nature of the transaction on offer, right? I mean, you can't, that doesn't exist in a vacuum. It is the question, it's any business decision, and it's any governmental decision, is what is being offered to me worth what I am not going to do? Right? I mean, the piece that the tribes have as a backstop is that our water rights are not use it or lose it. They're federal trust assets. They are not abandonable. They are not forfeitable. And at the end of the day, the guidelines are going to be of limited duration. And so we will get to the other side, and the tribes will still have their rights, and we'll figure out what to do with them then.
Governor Lewis talked about this a little bit yesterday. Just to kind of hone in on one of the things we're looking at. Currently, right now, a lot of the conservation, not all of it, but actually most of it now, because the ICS accumulation limits are maxed out. So it's all paid system conservation, and that's paid to leave that water, but it's part of the system. It's not part of any pool or protection. And I think from a community standpoint, that's great in the short term, but we should think about keeping that water up there so it can have it could be used in a way to protect the system on a more concrete level. And so that's why the pool concept is interesting to us. I think we're shifting to that and really like that idea because we see this additional benefit. And so in our risk calculation, we've got a lot at risk, and we want to see a stable system, and we want to have more tools to stabilize the system. And so that's, the short term, we just don't see a sustainable, it's not financially stable just to keep paying people not to use water, and then it just becomes system water and used again. We would need additional tools going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and the other, just to give sort of a Quechan-centric example, and again, with the caveat, I'm speaking for myself and not necessarily ascribable to the client, but there's also the question of when you are assessing risks and rewards and looking at what you're getting. It's not just money, right? I mean, because one of the things, I mean, really the single most important value to Quechan is that we have a living river that runs from its headwaters to Mexico. And so part of the risk reward calculus that tribal council is likely to undertake is the value of something that we have a claim to, and to be able to perhaps monetize it, perhaps use it on the reservation, but perhaps also contribute it to the system to help make sure we have a living river, is an individual transaction and situation specific that we would think about as well. I mean, it really is very specific to the proposal in play. And some of those are things that we spend a lot of time thinking about. And at least for Quechan, we would love to hear other people's interesting ideas for things we could potentially do with our water.
So, you're talking about the Namarsa pool, right? So that's an example of the tribe putting water at the table so that we can get our settlement. Navajo wears lots of tools, lots of hats. So our Navajo Indian Irrigation Project already takes advantage of the conserved consumptive use, I think I can call it that, right, Peter? The conserved consumptive use programs in the upper Colorado River Basin. So again, it's either a business decision or a strategy decision, a political decision. And let me be super clear on what Navajo's main interest is on reservation development to develop a thriving economy, and that's very different than a living river. And it all is, I don't want to go too far down that, but I needed to make that point because a couple people have asked me that over the last couple of days, so I wanted to be super clear. As I mentioned, we have nearly 500,000 members. About half of them live on the reservation. We saw in COVID what happens when you don't have access to clean drinking water. So that's really what our focus is on. So when we talk about leasing water or not using water, it's so that we can earn revenue to develop the systems that we need so that people can have clean drinking water, first trucked and piped into the community, and then through different programs then gets to people's homes. So again, really the answer is very tribe specific.
Yeah, one of the risks that I worry about, and this is pretty consistent throughout Mountain Ute history. I think probably a lot of tribes is we don't know what the future is going to bring. We all are subject to that, but tribes are so narrowly confined. I mean, Native Americans are the most regulated people in the world, as far as I can tell, and so when the tribe enters into an agreement, like for instance, when it agreed to share shortages or take a lower priority on a certain river in order to get its water rights, the leaders at that time were making decisions for their people, and they were also thinking of their future. But when the future finally came and we saw the impacts of those decisions, the current leadership is really struggling with that. It doesn't necessarily fit into their paradigm of how they want to move themselves into the future. And so every time we do that, it's almost like we tie the hands of the future tribal leaders. And that's a big risk. And so as we start to do these agreements, when we start to receive compensation or we start to work out putting certain water into the river, those agreements and like the legislation we do in such things, it's very difficult to craft those thinking about a diverse future that we can't necessarily predict. But there's also a real benefit, I think. At the last conference last year, we heard a lot about the river as a living being. And it means a lot to keep the river healthy, to put that water into the river. There are many ways in which, and I'm speaking for myself now, this is my perception. I don't know what the tribe would say to me about this, but I think there are some ways in which the tribe is glad that its water is in the river, because it's keeping the river healthy. It's keeping the river, the fish are surviving, and the river itself is getting its different flows, and the vegetation that's surviving off the river is living. And so that's important too. The Ute Mountain doesn't want to pull water out of the river to the extent that it hurts the river, but it always has that balance it has to make between keeping the water in the river and keeping it healthy, but then also helping its people and bringing revenue and bringing development and bringing education for its tribal members. So those are some interesting conflicts that the tribe as a government has to face. And those are big risks to me. I worry very much about what we're going to decide today, that we won't even be here in 100 years to look at why we did that. You know, we reflected on 100 years a few years ago, and that was a great conference. That was a wonderful reflection. And there are ways that we looked at it positively, we looked at it negatively, and they're going to look back at us what we're doing in 100 years the same way. And I hope that we're smart enough to do everything so that we don't create problems that we didn't have to create.
Thank you so much. Another big picture question that might prompt an answer that's very tribe specific, but certainly connects with Bidtah, your piece or your description of how you keep using the acronym, but I'm going to say it the full term, the Northeastern Arizona Indian Water Rights Settlement Act that's currently being considered by Congress. You were describing how part of that settlement as proposed would involve taking Navajo water from the upper basin into the lower basin, right? So this question is situated in that way and touches on tribal sovereignty, the idea that tribal water rights are held by tribes as sovereigns. What are the arguments against interbasin transfers in the Colorado River Basin for tribes as sovereign nations?
Against?
Or for,
That question's not
yeah.
for me.
Yeah, we don't think that way.
Look at where we're situated. It's not. Do you want me to answer the for? I mean,
I do need to respect how the way the question was phrased by the audience members.
Well, here,
So
let me-
Getting
let me-
agreement
gotta
would be
respond to
the.
both.
Let me,
What
sorry,
are
let me-
the
Well,
arguments we
that's a
hearing?
good
Yeah.
point. Okay,
yeah.
so that's a good point.
Yeah.
So again, look at where we're situated. And we are only going to survive if upper basin water is transferred to the lower basin. There's just no other, I can't say it more simply than that. So I asked Peter, I was like, do you want to do this? And he said, well, the argument against is, are you going to get agreement on it? Well, I'm sitting, and I actually talked to somebody yesterday. I said, I stole your line, Mr. Cameron. I was like, teetering between hopeful and confident, but I'm confident we're going to get agreement. I'm confident. I just keep thinking on the resilience, the way the dean talked about resilience yesterday. And yeah, we're going to get there. We are. So.
I mean,
Yeah.
the argument against that most commonly we hear is the same concern that led to the compact in the first place, which is all the water is going to get sucked downhill to money. And so that is the fear that if you begin to open the door to any of those transfers, and I mean, tribes are differently situated legally, and you can differentiate between transfers from tribes and transfers from others. But as soon as you open that door is open, and the fear is who else will come through it. And I can tell you, nobody, at least at this table, is interested in a world in which we have hedge funds coming in and speculating on water. That is not a future that anyone wants to construct. And so this goes again to it's not a, this is what we want, no, it is a, well, how do we get here, which really is about how do we create transactional flexibility in ways that have appropriate sideboards and guardrails so that what we are doing respects the fact that we need all individually, collectively, everyone in the basin who's using water talks about transfer structures one way or another. The basin has examples. I mean, the QSA in California moves water from the river to municipalities. We have transfer structures that exist. As it stands right now, the three major lower basin state municipalities are talking about blurring the basin state lines with pure water. So the question is not like, is an interbasin transfer a good idea or a bad idea in a vacuum? It is, well, what does the mechanism or mechanisms from getting there look like? How do they help the potential transactors to benefit from themselves without imposing so much collateral and externalities damage on others that it makes sense as to have a tool as a basin that is collectively trying to be sustainable?
And so let me add to that, because because that's said another way, for Navajo, this is an Indian water rights settlement. Those are the guardrails. We're not, this is not
Right.
a general, and that's another reason why we're not post 2026. This is an Indian water rights settlement. We did not develop the compact. Look where we are. And we're living in a time when Mother Nature is sending us a big message. And we think we have a win-win-win solution by creating the pool and by allowing, by us leasing and earning some revenue. So we have O&R money to keep these water infrastructure projects running. Maybe the real answer to the question is, it is about shifting the way we think about things, right? It's just, how are we thinking about this? Because I think that, I don't know who asked, but I think the question is a very compact-based question, right? It's a very compact-based question. And when Peter's talking about like, when we have to deal with our people, it's like, wait, why am I talking about the compact? Oh, I get it, but,
Yeah.
right.
So the other piece I would layer on there into that part of the discussion is we have a compact. We also have a Supreme Court decree in Arizona versus California. And for the 5 lower basin tribes whose rights were decreed in Arizona versus California, 1, 2, 3 of them have land in more than one lower basin state. And the quantifications in the decree for the diversion rights and the volumes are based on PIA in each state. But there is nothing in the decree. The only thing the decree really has to say about that on-reservation use, however the PIA was calculated by state, is that the water is attributed against the account of the state in which it is used. And if we don't have other ways of having productive conversations, and if we are pushed into boxes, at some point, whether it is us, whether it is CRIT, whether it's Fort Mojave, someone may push that envelope and decide, hey, I've got some Arizona water that I'm not using right now, I'm gonna put it on the California side, and California's gonna take that hit, or vice versa. Like, those are risks that exist out there. We certainly aren't interested in spending resources to do it because we would rather find more constructive ways. But part of the conversations that we have and part of the conversations that are real that I know are going on elsewhere is like, what are your risks and what are your leverage points, right? I mean, because I will say that one word you've heard none of us use sitting up here is equity. And one thing that none of us have talked about is the 125, 150 years of tribal exclusion from the basin, all of which is deeply, deeply, deeply real, none of which is going to help us get to where we need to be.
You know, the tribes start in these discussions and from these perspectives as a sovereign, saying they can do whatever they want to do, whatever they have to do to help their people, they should be able to do. And there are solutions that we've talked about that I won't bring up because of trigger words. There are solutions we've thought of that as sovereigns, the tribes can solve, that there are issues today that we are all trying to solve, that we can solve, but there's paper, there's rules, it's the lawyers got involved, and so now, and I know.
First thing let's do.
Yeah, you know, right, exactly. So the lawyers got involved, so we have these rules that prevent us from coming with effective solutions. Ute Mountain could use its water that's bypassing its Animus Plata project, but the solutions that it has for using that water don't fit within the current paradigms the legal paradigms that we've set up. And so, like I was saying earlier about the legislation that we think of in the agreements, we need to be smart about that. And let's not put up a lot of barriers and a lot of walls to particularly tribal use. I mean, I'm advocating for the tribes at this point. I'm sure there are a million people out there who want to say this about their organizations, how they look at things, but tribes need to have this freedom, and they're different than everybody else. They're not corporations, they're governments, and they're trying to do what they can. And so I want tribes to be able to come up with whatever solution suits them, particularly working with other tribes and with other entities. But there's too many things that hold us back.
And I just want to make the point that we are governments that will last forever. I think
Yes.
the temporal is so important to this conversation.
That's very true.
Next question. Next question.
Okay. Yeah, that was good. I think we probably have time for one more question because it's a pretty thought-provoking one as well. It connects this panel back with the climatology research and comments about climate change's impacts on the basin's hydrology that Brad, both yesterday and in so many settings, has brought to the fore. So the questions, it's really twofold. Do some tribes see Brad Udall's climate threat differently from others? Is there tribal variation, right? Second part, do they have a different understanding of the climate threat compared to non-Indian water users?
Well, I don't know if I can answer that directly. I'll just say that from a Gila River perspective, there is airification happening. How bad it's going to be, I think, is kind of beside the point for the community, given its nature of its water. It's Colorado River water anyway, and it's really trying to find ways to rely less on Colorado River water supplies that are not going to be as reliable. So its planning is really to kind of move away. There's a term called amicable separation that's being thrown about. We're kind of looking at maybe a longer term divorce eventually from the Colorado River. And I don't know that that'll ever be achievable, but we're kind of moving in that direction or planning in that direction. And there's other river systems, and they say they face similar risks. But I think from a community's long-term planning, future generations, is we want to rely more on our traditional water sources, which is within the Gila River system, and look at augmentation in those systems and elsewhere too. But we're addressing this in a more practical way. No one knows what the future is going to really hold for us, but it's probably not going to be better in terms of hydrology. And so we're planning for it to be worse, and I think that's how we approach it.
Yeah, no, I think that Jason makes really important points, and I think that certainly for Quechan's perspective, it's very local. I mean, you saw, Frank was talking about yesterday in some of the slides that you saw. I mean, the reason we're doing a lot of the things that we are doing is to restore the native ecosystem on the reservation, because that is what evolved to address these conditions. It's not the invasive species, it's the mesquites, it's the cottonwoods, it's the willows. And the more that we can do to restore the natural ecosystem of the reservation that is more capable of being resilient, along with all of the important cultural values that serves, that brings a degree of I mean, it's another tool potentially to try to address the unknown risks that we're going to have, to try to make sure that the reservation remains a permanent homeland for the Quechan people who've been there since time immemorial. Because the point that Bidtah made about the temporality is also really important. Because at the end of the day, if climate change is that bad, the tribes will have the Southwest to themselves. The tribes will have the Southwest to themselves.
Oh, no joke.
Oh,
No. I'm saying that because I was talking at breakfast this morning with Felicia and Bob and Erica, and we're talking about mouths of, what comes from the mouths of babes. And my son was like 15 or 16, maybe 14. And he's like, Mom, with climate change, he was actually concerned. He's like, do you think that people are going to be moving up from Phoenix? Because, the temperature is going to be so wonderful where we are. And so either Gila is going to be alone and Navajo is going to be flooded. But again, this is a complex question. The people know climate change is happening, no question. Aridification is a real thing. You can look it up on the internet. USGS
doesn't care if you believe in it.
It doesn't care if you believe in it, and the people know that. So the USGS had been pounding the table for decades, showing what's happening at Western Navajo. We have families who own backhoes to keep shoveling out the sand. So they know it's real. I think how do you address it is the problem. Because again, I don't hear this so much anymore, but one of the things that people were saying on the reservation is, yes, we see the climate change, but our 2 coal-fired power plants aren't to blame. Right, I mean, now we only have 1 coal-fired power plant, but I think what's behind that is the United States brought these things to us, and you haven't helped us transition out of it, right? Like, because what those power plants brought in the coal mines is jobs. And so we actually spent quite a bit of time talking with the 7 basin states when we met with them the first time in November of last year, explaining what happened when Navajo generating station shut down. The local school district lost 17% of its population from the spring to the fall. And what was interesting was when Mojave, I don't know how many people remember Mojave generating station, but if you remember Mojave generating station, what we saw was the coal miners could travel to work and then come back. They couldn't do that when Navajo generating station closed. They just left. And then the employees at the station all moved to the Valley of Phoenix. And that's the threat, right? That is the threat, losing your language and your culture. But I do want to talk about, so one of the, and again, I keep talking about, referencing Mr. Cameron in the conversations we had yesterday, because somebody else said the same thing to me yesterday about Navajo generating station, where there was such a split on the reservation. Yay, no, yes, no. And there were people who were against it, and there are the proud coal miners and the proud plant workers who raised families and are very proud of that work. But one of the first projects I worked in where there was no division was the California Carbon Offset Program, where you can use your forest as a forest sink. So we just, and Erica, I helped start it, Erica finished it. We are finally in the program. And it was okay, how do you explain the sink issue and the carbon and what are we getting credits for? And yes, there's some people who get it in their gut, like, is this really helping climate change? But
Sounds kind of like voodoo.
yeah, but we're getting money to keep our forests healthy, and we're helping the climate, and we have the largest old growth forests in the country, and that means some of our traditional practices. Win, 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 win. I mean, it was the first project I worked on where we didn't have dissension. So I think the point of that is, yes, climate change is real. Our people know it's real. Interesting with all the energy demand now. I've got permission from Bobby of Salt River Project to say this publicly. He stood up, I think, 2 years ago and said publicly they did not, Salt River Project, the owner-operator of Navajo generating station, did not give the Navajo Nation enough time for the shutdown. He did not say the next part, but I think that's a little bit of code for, wow, we still need this base power load, right? And we're seeing that with the AI generating station. So again, it's this strange animal of like, what was brought to us? How do we continue our traditional ways? How do we help society at large? How do we keep our culture and language thriving? I think climate change, right? That is the existential issue for everybody today. And so we're going through those same existential realities. And if we think creatively, if we think as a government that's going to last forever, we can get to those win-win-win situations.
And so the impacts, obviously, to the tribes are the same as everybody else, and we're as sensitive to that as anyone else. But I think what I would be remiss if I didn't point out that I think the perception of the climate change is a little different, at least for Ute Mountain, and I think also the solutions that they would propose are a little bit different. I think that a couple years ago, 3 years ago or so, we were asking ourselves, well, what would have happened if the tribes had participated in the negotiations of the compact? How would things have been different? And I guess all I can really add to that is some of the research I've done and some of the conversations I've had. And I'll talk about some research right now that's public. It was actually part of the Navajo Gallup Pipeline Cultural Resources Survey. And when I was reading that, I noted that historically, the Utes anyway, did not move water. They didn't believe in moving water. Well, we've had to move water because of population, but if we couldn't move water, would we have that population? Would we have some of these problems we have right now if we never moved the water? If we lived within the constraints of what Mother Nature provided to us always, if we always did that, would we live the way that we do today? And that's an important question, I think, culturally for Ute Mountain, because that's I can talk with you about that. I'll bring up that way. But the way to talk about it is different, though, a lot of times with the tribal members. Roger yesterday talked about the sun setting in a different place. That means something. That is a different way of looking at the same problem, and the solutions are different. So I think the perceptions are the same. We're being practical. We're trying to deal with it in the same way that everybody is. But I think we have to be sensitive to the fact that the culture itself looks at it differently, and it looks at the solutions differently. And we've never meshed those things together in any sincere way.
Thanks. Back to you, Tahlia.
I think we're at time.
So we have just a minute or two left, and I wanted to offer the panel an opportunity to reflect or say anything that has not been brought up so far. 30 seconds or less each.
So
I just want to thank you guys.
Put a timer on.
I just want to thank these guys.
we were talking, the four of us, right before the panel was starting, and we were talking about the stages of grief. And I think the thing we would leave the room with is that we are out of time to get done with denial and anger, and we need to get to freaking bargaining.
Thank you.
And to add to that, and we can all be depression later. And,
Right, depression and acceptance we'll get to,
later,
but it's bargaining time.
All right. Thank you so much to the panel.